My name is Elena, and I am 35 years old. For 10 years, I gave everything, my money, my time, my love, to keep my family's restaurant alive. I paid the bills, covered the salaries, even funded my sister's dreams. And when it finally thrived again, when the lights were bright and the tables full, guess who they celebrated? Not me, never me. They looked me dead in the eye, introduced me to strangers, and said, "This is Sofia's sister. She works in tech." That was it. Like my life, my sacrifices, my success didn't exist. But I promise you, by the end of this story, they would never, ever forget my name again. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or treated like you didn't matter, stick around. This story is for you. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Because every week, we bring you true stories of betrayal, justice, and unforgettable revenge. The night it all snapped was supposed to be a celebration. Picture this: La Familia, our family's restaurant in the heart of Miami. Bright fairy lights strung across the ceiling. The warm smell of sofrito and roasting garlic wrapping around every guest who walked in. The kind of night where laughter spills out into the street, and the music feels like it's alive in your chest. There were nearly 150 people packed into that dining room. Critics, influencers, food bloggers, even a couple of major investors. My parents walked around glowing, beaming at everyone who congratulated them on how far the restaurant had come. And at the center of it all, my younger sister, Sofia. She was radiant, I'll give her that. A flowing designer dress, her hair swept up like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. She was the golden child, the one everyone toasted to, the so-called savior of our family's legacy. But what no one in that room knew, not the critics, not the investors, not even most of our extended family, was that I had been the one quietly bleeding for this restaurant for over a decade. Every single month, without fail, I wired $2,000 from my account to theirs. For 10 years, that's $240,000 in total. Money that went into fixing leaky pipes, buying new stoves, covering payroll when the register was empty, and yes, funding Sofia's culinary school tuition when she decided she wanted to be a chef. And yet, standing there in that room, I wasn't Elena, the backbone who'd held it all together. No, I was just Sofia's sister, who works in tech. Now let me pause and explain something. I don't just work in tech. I'm the chief technology officer of a startup valued at $500 million. My algorithms power an app that millions of people use around the world. I've worked endless nights, built a reputation in my field, and climbed to a place very few ever reach. But my family? They never asked about my work, never cared about what I built. To them, my life wasn't Instagram-worthy. I didn't wear a chef's coat. I didn't plate food in artistic swirls. I didn't smile in glossy magazine spreads. I was just the other daughter, the background character in Sofia's story. And here's the thing, I didn't mind helping. In the beginning, I did it gladly. I loved our family restaurant. I grew up in that kitchen, sitting on the counter while my abuela taught me how to roll empanadas. I wanted La Familia to survive, and if that meant writing check after check, so be it. But the thank yous stopped coming. The acknowledgments faded, and eventually, it was like I didn't exist at all. Do you know what it feels like to watch your little sister live the dream you paid for? While your parents brag about her to strangers like you had nothing to do with it, it's not just painful, it's suffocating. That night, during the relaunch party, I overheard something that cut deeper than any of their dismissals before. I was standing near the bar when a woman I didn't know leaned toward me, her cocktail glass glinting under the lights. She smiled politely and said, "It must be tough, living in Sofia's shadow." Her words weren't meant to wound. They were casual, even sympathetic. But in that moment, it was like a trapdoor opened beneath me, because she was right. I had been living in Sofia's shadow, not because I wasn't successful, not because I wasn't worthy, but because my own family had shoved me there and left me. My chest burned. My palms went clammy. For a split second, I thought about just walking out, disappearing into the night, and never coming back. But then I saw Sofia take the stage. She raised her champagne glass, smiling like the star she believed herself to be. She began thanking the crowd, our parents, her mentors, even the investors who had believed in her vision. And then, like a knife twisting, she claimed credit for securing the lead investor, the one who had put $1 million into the restaurant's future. That wasn't true. That deal was mine. I had used my connections in the tech world to make that introduction, vouched for my family, convinced the investor to take a chance. Sofia hadn't even been in the room when the deal was struck. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. My chest rose and fell like I had run a marathon. 10 years of being silent, 10 years of being the invisible daughter, 10 years of swallowing my pride. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I remember thinking, if I stay quiet now, I'll disappear forever, so I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the tile, my plain black jumpsuit a stark contrast to Sofia's glittering dress. I raised my hand and said, "Can I say something?" The microphone was passed to me. The music stopped. The crowd turned, curious, expectant, and that's when everything changed. The microphone felt heavier than I expected, like the weight of 10 years had settled into that small black handle. Every eye in the room was fixed on me, some curious, some impatient, others already annoyed that I was interrupting their Golden Girls moment. My parents looked panicked, like I was about to drop a bomb they weren't ready to hear. I took a slow breath. My voice came out steady, but underneath my chest was trembling. For 10 years, I began. I've sent $2,000 every month to this restaurant. That's $240,000 for renovations, for salaries, and yes, Sofia's culinary school. A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd like a wave. I could see Sofia's smile falter, the color draining from her face. She stepped forward quickly, her hand half reaching for the microphone. "Elena, this isn't the time," she hissed, her voice sharp, her eyes darting toward the investors in the room. "When is the time?" I countered, my words cutting through the tension like a knife. "When you take credit for the investor I brought in? When you let everyone here believe you've been carrying this restaurant on your back alone?" I lifted my phone and unlocked the screen, my thumbs shaking but determined. "Here's every transfer, every single payment I've made. And here's one from last year, $20,000. Not for the restaurant, for Sofia's personal catering business." The room erupted into whispers. I held my ground, refusing to flinch, even as Sofia's eyes widened in panic. "Elena, stop," my mother snapped, her voice like a whip. "You're embarrassing us." "Embarrassing?" I repeated, my voice rising with each word. "What's embarrassing is pretending that one daughter saved this place while the other was nothing but a shadow. What's embarrassing is that I've been invisible to you, to all of you, while I kept this family afloat." My father stepped forward then, his face red, his voice low but firm. "Enough, Elena. Put the microphone down." I turned to him slowly, my heart breaking even as my resolve hardened. "For once, Dad, no, I won't be quiet. Not tonight." I shifted my gaze to the investors, to the journalists scribbling notes, to the people who had been toasting Sofia like she was some saint. "My name is Elena Martinez. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Horizon Tech. It was my connections, my reputation, that secured the $1 million investment Sofia just claimed credit for. Check the contracts. My name's on them." The silence that followed was suffocating. All I could hear was my own heartbeat hammering in my chest. I handed the microphone back and stepped down, my body buzzing with adrenaline. The crowd parted as I walked past, some whispering in shock, others staring at me with wide eyes. I didn't look back at my parents. I didn't look at Sofia. I just kept walking until the cool night air hit my face outside the restaurant. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt seen, but the story didn't end there. No, this was just the spark. The firestorm that followed would tear through everything. My sister's reputation, my parents' blind favoritism, and the delicate image of the restaurant they thought was untouchable. Because you don't bury someone for a decade and expect them to stay underground forever. And I was only just getting started. The night after the confrontation, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every word replaying in my mind, every gasp, every look of shock etched behind my eyelids. My phone buzzed nonstop, texts from my mother, missed calls from my father, even a frantic string of messages from Sofia. "Elena, You ruined everything. Elena, how could you humiliate us like that? Elena, please delete the post if you're planning to share it. I didn't respond to any of them. My hands shook every time I thought about it, not from regret, but from the raw adrenaline still pulsing through me. For 10 years, I had swallowed my pride, forced myself to stay quiet, told myself my time would come. But that night, when I finally stepped into the light, I realized something terrifying. They had never intended to give me a moment. I had to take it. By the next morning, the fallout had begun. Articles popped up on local food blogs. Drama at La Familia relaunch party, with whispers of mismanagement, financial secrets, and a family feud playing out in public. The investors were already asking questions. One even called me directly, his tone careful but firm. Elena, we need clarity, he said. We invested under the impression Sofia was transparent. Were we misled? I took a deep breath before answering. Yes, she's talented, no doubt. But she wasn't honest about how this place survived, or how that deal came together. If you want the truth, you'll find my name on the paperwork, not hers. There was silence on the other end before he finally said, We'll need a meeting with you, soon. For the first time, I heard it in his voice. Respect. Not because I was someone's sister, not because I was a background player, but because I had finally claimed my power. Still, power comes at a cost. At home, the messages from my parents grew colder. My mother accused me of jealousy, of trying to steal Sofia's moment. My father insisted I had disgraced the family. And Sofia, well, she sent me one line that burned like acid. You've destroyed me. I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I thought of the years I had worked overtime, funneling money I could have spent on myself into her tuition, her dream. I thought of the times I asked my parents if they were proud of me, only to be met with silence and a quick change of subject back to Sofia. No, this wasn't destruction. This was exposure, and exposure was only the beginning. For days, I felt the weight of their silence pressing against me, the guilt they tried to shove onto my shoulders. But something else was growing in me too, something sharper, more focused. Revenge wasn't just about what I'd done that night. It was about reclaiming every invisible piece of myself they had stolen over the years. And so I began to plan. It started with an idea that had been simmering in me for years, even when I didn't realize it. All those young women I met in tech, brilliant minds who were constantly dismissed, underestimated or overshadowed, just like me. I thought of the interns I had mentored, the junior developers who told me they felt unseen. What if I could give them what I never had? I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen cutting through the darkness of my apartment. I started drafting the framework for a scholarship fund, $3 million set aside for women in tech who came from underrepresented backgrounds. I named it the Unseen Innovators Scholarship. It wasn't just an act of generosity, it was my revenge. Because while my family clung to a restaurant built on my sacrifice, I was about to build a legacy of my own, one they could never take credit for, one that would outshine everything they thought made Sofia the star. Every keystroke filled me with a strange, electric calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't pouring money into a black hole of ungratefulness. I was planting seeds that would grow into something undeniable. But even as I worked, I knew I wasn't done with Sofia. Not yet. Because part of revenge isn't just walking away. Sometimes it's making sure the truth follows them wherever they go. And I was ready to make sure Sofia's shadow finally had a spotlight of its own, one she couldn't escape from. The scholarship plan felt both reckless and necessary, like a secret love letter to every overlooked coder I'd ever met. I told myself it wasn't about theater, it was about remedy. Still, there was a part of me that wanted the spectacle. The tiny, humiliating mirror held up to my family's faces, forcing them to see what they'd ignored. I started small. At first, because the truth about power is that it hides in details. I pulled out old spreadsheets, tax documents, receipts, anything that tied my money to the restaurant. I printed copies, filed them, cross-checked dates. I mapped the timeline of transfers. The month's payroll was scraped together. The nights the refrigerator died. The winter Sofia's tuition bills arrived. Seeing the numbers on paper made it real in a way that felt both terrible and liberating. I let myself be exact. I let myself be cold when I needed to be. Then I drafted the scholarship's basic rules. I wanted it to be rigorous, impossible to challenge, need-based, merit-based, open to women from underrepresented backgrounds who were building or studying technology. I set criteria for mentorship, for project funding, for internships at companies where I could pull strings. I wrote it so the narrative would be plain and undeniable. The Unseen Innovator Scholarship existed because women like me had been invisible. Until now, work consumed me in a different way. At Horizon Tech, the product roadmap hadn't waited for family drama. I continued to ship features, to sit in sprint reviews, to talk about latency and load balancing in a calm voice while inside, a different clock was ticking. My team noticed something looser in my step, less hiding, more purpose. A couple of interns asked if I wanted to mentor them. I started inviting them to coffee. I listened to their quiet complaints about microaggressions, about managers who took credit, about their parents' questions about when they'd find a real job. Their stories mirrored mine so often it felt like reading the same book in different handwriting. Meanwhile, the press kept circling. Food blogs ran pieces, some celebratory of family drama, others suspicious. Sofia's social media followers ballooned for a few days, then plummeted when threads started tracing the money. One influencer's Instagram story, filmed that night, was reshared until the clip of me holding my phone and saying, "Here's every transfer," had its own life. I didn't care about the views. I cared about clarity. I had wanted the room to know. Now the room had become 100 rooms across the internet, and each one repeated the words I'd used to claim my reality. Not everyone reacted as I had hoped. At family gatherings, the silence turned into small cruelties. "You made a scene," my mother would say under her breath, as if decorum mattered more than truth. "You embarrassed Sofia." There was no apology, no thank you, only a taut resentment that hummed through the house like bad electricity. Sofia's messages shifted from angry to pleading. At first she wrote that I'd ruined her career. After that came threats, thinly veiled accusations that I'd purposely tried to sabotage her. At one point she accused me of misreading the transfers, of misunderstanding the purpose of that $20,000. "That was for equipment," she told me in a voice message, furious and brittle. "Catering needs new refrigerators, Elena. You know that." I listened to the message 3 times, my mouth tasting metal. It was almost funny how she'd tried to rewrite what was already taped to the bank's ledger. There were nights I wanted to call her, to beg her to see what she'd done, to sit with her like we used to when we were kids, and our biggest worry was whether grayscale cartoons would be on Saturday morning. But then I remembered the way she'd taken center stage that night, the way our parents had introduced me like an accessory. There was a line between forgiving and erasing, and I refused to step back over it. My plan crystallized into 3 parts: expose, build, and redirect. Expose meant making the truth about funds and creditability visible to anyone who needed to know. Investors, journalists, and even the people who came to the restaurant thinking Sofia had single-handedly revived it. I had no interest in petty humiliation for its own sake. I wanted correction, contracts, emails, my name signed on a handful of investor documents. Those would speak in a way gossip never could. Build meant launching the scholarship with an authority the family couldn't ignore. I wouldn't merely hand out a check. I would create a board, set up grant committees, bring in respected leaders from the tech and academic communities, and seed internships at companies where I had influence. It would be organized, public, and powerful. Most of all, it would be anchored in my name, in a way no one could reassign to Sofia or their narrative. Redirect was the psychological dagger. I would redirect the family's narrative by creating something that highlighted what they had failed to see. If they wanted a legacy, they would have to contend with the legacy I built, a fund that changed lives, that put talented women into positions they'd been barred from. The restaurant could thrive or fail. It would no longer be the only story they could tell about the Martinez name. But plans, good ones, require allies. I began to probe for support. I reached out discreetly to former colleagues, to a couple of trusted mentors, and to the investor who had called me after the party. Some were surprised, some wary, "This will be messy," one said. "Are you sure about public?" Another, a woman who had been underestimated her whole career, simply replied, "I'm in." That message felt like a warm hand on my shoulder. There were logistical hurdles. Establishing a $3 million scholarship required a legal structure, a tax-savvy approach, a board of advisors, and clear documentation to avoid the kind of backroom narratives my family loved. I scheduled meetings with lawyers who specialized in foundations. I described the fund in terms that made their eyes light up: access to mentorship networks, stipends for hardware and tuition, fellowship stipends for early career women. We talked about impact metrics and reporting mechanisms so that when the press came calling, they wouldn't be able to smear it as a vanity project. While I built, I slowed the momentum of the smear campaign by controlling the narrative. I wrote a short, careful press release. Clear language, a list of trustees, a mission statement. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't dramatize. I simply wrote the facts, then asked several friends in journalism to vet the language. I wanted the scholarship to be unimpeachable. At home, the war continued in small, corrosive ways. My mother refused to look at me at the dinner table. My father picked at his food, eyes flicking to the TV whenever a segment on the restaurant appeared. Once my mother made me coffee and set it down in front of me without a word. The cup was too hot. The mug was chipped. She didn't meet my eyes. It was a tiny cruelty she likely didn't intend, because attention can be cruelty when it's withheld. Sofia tried to fight back publicly. She posted a video of herself in the restaurant kitchen, plating a seared fish with an expression that mixed hurt and performance. She spoke about passion, about sacrifice, about her vision for La Familia. The comments split. Some loyalists defended her, saying family was complicated. Others questioned why she'd failed to mention me anywhere. The internet became a messy jury. Then came a private meeting that shifted everything. The lead investor asked to meet with me alone. We sat in a small conference room with the hum of the city outside like background noise. He was a man who'd made money by seeing connections others dismissed. His eyes were quick, his fingers steepled. "Elena," he said after the small talk, "we're anxious. The board wants assurances. Did Sofia misrepresent the origin of this investment?" I told him everything. The introductions I'd made, the calls I'd placed, the time I'd spent explaining our family history to an investor who trusted me because of my reputation. I presented documents, emails with my name CC'd, a signed term sheet with my recommended clauses, bank transfers that matched dates he recognized. He read, stitched the pieces together, and looked up with a slow, new respect. "This changes things," he said. "We need transparency in the leadership of the restaurant. We need to know who's actually making decisions." He didn't say the words, but the implication was clear. If Sofia had been dishonest, the risk profile of the restaurant had changed dramatically. For a moment, I tasted victory, iron and sweet. But I also felt a prickle of fear. Reputation, once damaged, can recover, but at the risk of everything you built. Sofia would not go quietly. Our parents would not either. I knew now that this was no longer just a family quarrel. It was an expose that could splinter relationships, livelihoods, and community reputations. I kept building the scholarship with a grim focus. I negotiated with university partners to offer course credits to recipients. I arranged for mentors at companies that had previously rejected early career women from non-traditional backgrounds. I set up interviews for the first cohort. Each email felt like a stitch in a new fabric I was weaving, one that could be draped across the family's old tapestry and cover the holes they'd left. And then, the first close call. An acquaintance of my parents, a local columnist, called me, sounding as if he were doing me a favor. "I'm writing a piece," he said, voice syrupy. "I could spin this as family drama, Elena. Are you sure you want all of Miami to see this?" He made it sound like a threat. He held the city's gossip in the palm of his hand. I told him quietly, "Write the truth." There was a long pause. "That's not how this works." He chuckled, as if reminding me of the rules. "People want stories, not ledgers." That call made me smile in a way that surprised me. Maybe people wanted stories, but they also wanted consequences. That was the dangerous truth. Stories shaped reputations, but facts could erode them. And I had facts. As the launch date loomed for the scholarship, my public and private lives collided. Invitations arrived for panels where I'd speak about tech equity. Nonprofits reached out for partnerships. Mothers of potential recipients thanked me for doing something I'd never been thanked for. The praise felt strange, almost foreign, but healing in a slow, steady way I hadn't expected. At home, the tension steeled into something that looked like a truce, cool, brittle, and false. My parents attended a church event and returned with a friendlier tone, as if their social calendar demanded they act civil. Sofia stopped sending daily messages and instead posted carefully curated photos, but the undercurrent of retribution stayed. I realized quietly that my revenge didn't have to humiliate them publicly. It simply had to reorient what the world knew. The scholarship would stand like a signpost. We were more than the stories they told. I would not reduce them to a moral lesson. I would instead amplify a different story, one where invisible contributions were recognized and rewarded. The night before the scholarship's public announcement, I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights a scatter of distant embers. I'd prepared a speech, brief remarks for the launch gala, a list of recipients, photographs, testimonials. I'd rehearsed what to say about family, about gratitude, about the necessity of being seen. I had also prepared for the backlash, the op-eds that would call me vengeful, the social feeds that would accuse me of grandstanding. I knew the moment of truth would not be a single point of victory. It would be an accumulation, the emails, the handshakes, the internships accepted, the bank confirmations. It would be the slow, certain work of building something that could not be erased. And yet a small, stubborn part of me wanted a final confrontation. Not to humiliate, but to make them watch as the world told a different story about what our family meant. To make them recognize, finally, that the daughter they'd introduced as the one who works in tech was the one who had built a platform that changed lives. I fell asleep with my laptop open, the draft press release waiting on the screen like a loaded gun. The next morning would be loud. The next morning would be the reveal. But before the reveal, there would be one more variable I hadn't fully controlled. Sofia. She texted me that night. One line, no punctuation. Just, we need to talk. I stared at it, the message glowing like a pinpoint in the dark. The scholarship could change public perception for good, but family conversations could undo a lot of private peace. Her tone meant anything could happen. Apology, accusation, or something I couldn't predict. I typed back, slower than I wanted to. Tomorrow, I wrote, after the event. Her reply came within a minute. Fine. I closed my laptop and tried to sleep, but sleep felt thin and tentative. Outside Miami hummed with indifferent life. I thought about the way my mother used to braid Sofia's hair when we were small, how their affection had always skewed to the visible, to the dramatic. I thought about my abuela in the kitchen, how she'd split a tortilla and given equal pieces to both of us, never asking which of her granddaughters would be praised most. I promised myself, then and there, that the next morning would be more than spectacle. It would be a reckoning, not out of spite but out of restoration. The city breathed. I closed my eyes. In the thin dark before dawn, the thought came into my head unbidden and clear. Change one life, and you change 100 more. Change enough lives, and you change the story a family tells about itself. That was the aim. That was the plan. And as I drifted, the last thing I heard in my skull was the echo of the woman at the bar who'd once told me, with that too polite pity, "It must be tough, living in Sofia's shadow." Tomorrow, I would decide whether to make that pity a relic of the past, or a lesson learned too late. The night ended. Morning came. The scholarship launch was an hour away. The city slept, and I sat on the edge of what I had built, feeling both the thrill and the terror of what would come next. The day of the scholarship launch felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, both terrifying and exhilarating. I had chosen a small but elegant venue in downtown Miami, far from the warm chaos of La Familia. No smell of sofrito, no chatter of family friends. This was a new world, mine. Rows of chairs lined the hall, each draped in white linen. A stage with a podium stood at the front, flanked by 2 tall banners with the words, Unseen Innovators Scholarship in bold silver letters. Behind them, a projection screen displayed the faces of the first recipients. Young women from different backgrounds, each with a story that mirrored mine in some way. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation as guests filled the room. Tech leaders, professors, journalists, even the same investors who had once toasted to Sofia at the restaurant. And then I saw them, my parents, seated in the third row. My mother's face was stiff, her lips pressed into a line. My father shifted uncomfortably in his suit, his eyes darting around as if unsure if he should even be there. And next to them, dressed in a subdued navy dress, was Sofia. She looked smaller than I remembered, less radiant than she had been under those fairy lights. There was a strain in her eyes, a tightness in her posture. For once, she wasn't center stage. She was in the audience. I stepped onto the podium, the microphone warm in my hand. My heart pounded, but this time it wasn't fear. It was clarity. "Good evening," I began. "My name is Elena Martinez. For most of my life, I've known what it feels like to work hard and remain unseen. To pour your time, your energy, your resources into something, only for the credit to go to someone else. Many of you know what that feels like." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. That's why I created the Unseen Innovators Scholarship, a $3 million fund dedicated to supporting underrepresented women in tech. Women who, like me, have been told their work doesn't shine bright enough, who have been pushed into the shadows when they were the ones holding everything together. The screen behind me flickered to life, showing short clips of the scholarship recipients. A young woman from Little Havana who built an app to help immigrant families access resources. Another from a rural town in Texas who taught herself Python on a borrowed laptop. A third, barely 18, who dreamed of designing AI systems for hospitals. As each story played, I saw tears in the audience, nods, quiet murmurs of admiration. These weren't just numbers or bank transfers. These were lives changed. And then I delivered the line that had burned in me for months. "You're not just coders. You're the backbone of innovation, and you deserve to be seen." The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. People stood to clap. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. The validation, the recognition, the justice. When I opened them, my gaze landed on my parents. My mother was clapping slowly, her eyes glistening with something I couldn't name. My father looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. And Sofia, she sat frozen, her hands clasped in her lap, her jaw tight. After the speeches ended and the mingling began, people crowded around me, congratulating me, asking about the scholarship, offering partnerships. Investors who had once shaken hands with Sofia now sought me out, their respect obvious. And then, like a shadow slipping through the crowd, Sofia appeared. She pulled me aside, her voice low but urgent. "Elena," she said, her eyes searching mine. "We need to talk." I waited, silent. "I know I messed up," she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "I should have given you credit. I should have thanked you. But did you have to do this?" She gestured toward the room, the banners, the journalists scribbling notes. "You've destroyed my reputation." I looked at her, really looked at her. The sister I had once adored, the girl I had paid for, the woman who had stolen my spotlight again and again. For years, I would have given anything for her acknowledgement. But now, standing in the glow of my own creation, I realized I didn't need it. "I didn't destroy your reputation, Sofia," I said softly but firmly. "You did. I just stopped hiding it for you." Her eyes welled with tears. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came. Finally, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step a retreat. The investors never looked at her again the same way. Journalists stopped calling her the savior of La Familia. Her catering business limped along, scarred by the whispers of dishonesty. She wasn't ruined, but she was forced to rebuild with transparency, stripped of the unearned glory she had once thrived on. As for my parents, something shifted in them. Weeks after the gala, they reached out asking if we could meet. Over cafecitos at a quiet cafe, my mother finally said the words I had waited my whole life to hear. "Elena, "We're sorry. We should have seen you. We should have been proud." Tears slipped down her cheeks. My father nodded silently, his hand trembling as he covered mine. For the first time, they weren't just clapping for Sofia. They were clapping for me. And as for me, I didn't need their applause anymore. I had found peace in the success of the scholarship recipients. Each acceptance letter, each breakthrough project, each young woman stepping boldly into the light, it was like reclaiming a piece of myself. I had been invisible. But not anymore, the final irony. The next time someone recognized me in public, it wasn't as Sofia's sister. It was as Elena Martinez, the woman who had changed lives. And this time, I didn't step out of anyone's shadow. I stood in my own light. Months passed, and the world slowly learned a new story about the Martinez family. Not the myth of a fiery chef who had carried everyone on her back, but the truth of a quiet woman who had taken years of invisibility and turned it into a platform for others. The Unseen Innovators Scholarship took on a life of its own. Applications poured in from across the country, then across borders. Women who had once thought tech was a door closed to them were suddenly building apps, launching startups, and standing on stages of their own. Every time I opened my inbox, I found another message that began with the words, "You don't know me, but because of your scholarship." Those emails became my fuel. They were proof that revenge could transform into legacy, that pain could become power when redirected outward. Sofia, meanwhile, lived in a quieter spotlight. The catering company didn't collapse, but it shrank. No more magazine covers, no more glossy interviews. Investors were cautious. Clients asked harder questions. She still cooked, because cooking was her gift. But now, she had to rely on transparency. For the first time, her work had to stand without borrowed scaffolding. Our relationship was fragile. Sometimes she texted me late at night, apologies half-formed, or questions about how to handle contracts. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. Forgiveness is a slow, uneven thing, like scar tissue forming. My parents changed in small, awkward ways. My mother would ask about my projects at dinner, her tone stiff but trying. My father introduced me at church one Sunday as our daughter Elena, the one who started that scholarship. It wasn't a perfect rewrite of history, but it was a step. One evening, as I walked past La Familia, I saw the lights glowing warm inside, the smell of garlic drifting out onto the street. For a moment I thought about going in, about sitting at a table, ordering my favorite dish, pretending nothing had happened. But I didn't. Some doors close for a reason. Some shadows aren't meant to be revisited. Instead, I kept walking, my phone buzzing in my hand with a notification. Another scholarship recipient had just been accepted to MIT. I smiled. The kind of smile that comes from knowing the story has finally shifted. For years, I had lived in the background, applauding others while my own hands went unseen. But now, the applause wasn't for a performance. It was for the work, the impact, the lives changed. I was no longer Sofia's sister, I was Elena Martinez. And I was finally, undeniably visible,